And just so I get your position correct, though, Doctor, your solution is not purely a car-based answer to our traffic congestion.
Absolutely.
So you would take a look at the multimodal approach, if you will, then to try and deal with congestion, the ferry system, an expanded bus system, but not just focus on the elevated tollway as you've been testifying.
In fact, we need to do a multimodal approach, and I agree with that, but and the thinking changes on the national stage is that there is actually proposed regulation by the FTA to convert HOV lanes to hot lanes, and those would be alternatives to FG, fixed guideway. So those would be eligible for direct FTA funding, because hot highways, the primary existence of hot highway is to be a guideway for express buses, and reserve capacity is sold. So it is not, the focus is not to serve single occupant vehicles. So we are thinking in the same vein, in other words.
It's interesting as we listen to the discussion from everyone that's interested in this issue, obviously. It seems that depending on what position you take, it all ends up being that we are trying to build our way out of a problem. Mm-hmm. Whether it's I'm for rail, you're for the elevated tollway, and all these other expanded busways. And what about this approach? What about taking the problem right at the bud, so that we may not have to deal with all of these other modes that we're wrestling over? Why don't we just limit the number of cars that come here and take, for instance, the model that was adopted in Bermuda, where there's a 1-for-1. You buy a new car, you get rid of a car. And so the net gain over time, you would decongest, and perhaps we won't have to deal with the kinds of modes and the kind of discussion that we're having today. Just limit the number of cars. Would the people of Hawaii subscribe to that kind of an idea, you think?
The census data that I reported suggests that the marketplace has been saturated. In other words, people buy cars for lifestyle reasons. So there could be a person that has, on the average, we have 1.2 cars. We have more cars than driver's licenses. So we may be selling cars, or the dealers may be selling cars, but those cars are not actually on the road, because as a driver, you can only drive one car at a time. In fact, I have a second car, I have to admit, but it's always parked unless I park the first car and use the second one. So car sales and all do not really, so both the acquisition of cars and the building of roads do not lead to congestion. What leads to congestion is people's activities. Now, if we are going into a social environment that we want to regulate people's activities, that is another subject. For me, the future is very similar to what we have today. We will be traveling with much smaller cars, much more energy efficient cars, but the preference for people would be autonomy and independence, because that's what our lives are. And I am quite, I'm a little disappointed about, the thoughtfulness of our students here at the UH, that they come and say that, the rail will be so useful to them, because they are among the most multitasking people. And, they go surf, they go to town to work, they have school, and then they go see this and that. Rail will never be able to satisfy 10% of what they actually do. So their idealism may be, interesting, but in reality, what they want to happen is not going to happen.
Multitasking, I think the reference is actually to chain tripping, where you have these multiple tasks, if you will.
Right.
And that is why we are so automobile dependent, because we go not just from to and from work, but we have to pick up the car in the mail, we have to pick up the kid from the babysitter and drop the kid off at soccer practice. So that is what we refer to as the multitasking.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify from something you said. So you're not in support of rail, but you are in support of fixed guideway for buses, or is that what you said?
Councilwoman Marshall, the hot highway is a fixed guideway. The primary purpose of a hot highway, as defined by the federal government and by the transportation experts, is a high occupancy primarily / toll facility. High occupancy means buses, city buses, tour buses, and van pools. In some cases, you may define it also as carpools of 4 or more. But anything less is considered low occupancy. And low occupancy, they have to pay the price if the capacity is available to use, because we want to operate that efficiently at free flow speed, 55 to 65 miles an hour.
Okay. Do you agree with the cost assessments for, well, first of all, is what you're suggesting even in the alternatives analysis? I mean, if we combine the TSM,
no.
It's
no,
not?
It's not.
So that wasn't looked at all?
It wasn't looked at, no.
But it sounds like it might be something that's expensive, that might be as expensive even as building a rail, fixed guideway rail.
No, actually it's not, because it's like having the Tampa project, and we give priority to buses that we already have, and maybe we need to buy a few more. But the interesting thing about the hotways is that they are so efficient, because essentially you travel like 60 miles per hour, which means in 14 minutes you cover 14 miles. So you are from Waikele to downtown. Therefore, the same bus can actually do the round trip 2 times in the same hour. So actually you don't need to buy more buses with the hot lanes.
But there's nothing in the alternatives analysis that deals with that particular alternative.
Peripherally, they try to design that, and in one of the alternatives, they have a reversible expressway, but it was a 2-lane facility, and then they removed the zipper lane. So the managed lane alternative in your book is simply a single freeway lane, which is, 1/3 of what Tampa is doing.
Okay.
The interesting thing is that if you compare the numbers, actually one new lane of freeway is almost as good as a $6 billion rail. That is quite significant, because the numbers, the bars, if you look at them, the benefits and all, they're quite comparable. So imagine what one lane of freeway does vis-a-vis 28 miles and 22 or 30 rail stations.
So again, what you're suggesting would relieve traffic congestion.
Yes.
Congestion is a fixed guideway, but dealing with buses and high occupancy vehicles.
That's correct.
Not rail.
Not rail, exactly.
Okay.
Too inflexible. Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Cachola.
Doctor, are you now questioning the report?
I am,
when
yes.
it comes to managed lane, to a point that they did not fully analyze it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir, I do. 100%.
And the basis is they just came up with 2 lanes rather than 3.
It's actually threefold. One is they came up with 2 lanes, but they subtracted a lane. And the second one is that they came with 2 lanes instead of 3. Then they subtracted a lane. And the third one is that they used what they say the state's Nimitz Viaduct, which didn't have any off-ramps because that was supposed to be a short project. And I fully agree, for example, with several of you and Councilman Apo that keeps raising the question of how do you, and Councilman Garcia, how do you distribute traffic? They didn't try to distribute traffic. They just dropped it down to a traffic light. That's what they did. They dropped those 2 lanes, and then there is a traffic light. And that facility became instantly congested. So your point is very valid, but that's the alternatives analysis, not a fully engineered solution.
So if you add the 3 lanes, just like what you're telling now, the results when it comes to the outcome, ridership, number of cars, the effectiveness of that mode will be different from what is in the report.
That is correct. Actually, we can think it by logic that if the express buses can do 14 miles in 14 minutes, the ridership on the buses will be at least as good as the rail, because you continue on the same bus to take you to your exact destination instead of having to do transfers.